Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFb podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin, the NFL Insider Series. We are taking flight today to New York technically, but really we know they play in Jersey. But New York Jets, Familia, New York Jets. We got our amigo Michael Nania from Jets X Factor coming in. He's joining us for the third year in a row. So I'm so happy he accepted our invite here. So before we jump in, first off, make sure you're following him at Michael_Nania or at Jets X Factor. Follow that YouTube page. You get great info there. Also, you want to make sure you're following Familia FFb on YouTube. Use what, our numbers have jumped because of this NFL Insider Series. Keep coming because we got more and more and more. And if this is the first episode, go back and watch the other ones because you got such great bite-sized information, all all dedicated to fantasy and how they're going to do. And one last thing, make sure when you go to Underdog, use that promo code Familia. Get in those best ball streets, Familia. There's some good picks that we're going to be talking about today. Maybe even a sleeper or two. So let's get into it. Michael, mi amigo Miguel, gosh, I mean, what a tough season. I mean, it last year, I mean, it was from the defensive standpoint, I don't know how they could have been better, but man, it was after 4 plays to have it be sucked out at just from a coverage standpoint, that had to be just rough.
Yeah, I'm glad you still remembered the existence of the Jets after their 4-play season last year and asked me back because it feels like a lot of people forgot about the Jets and wrote them off immediately, which justifiably so, as we saw with the way the remainder of the season went. But I think they recovered in a really nice way this offseason and have themselves poised for an even higher ceiling going into this year than they had going into last.
It's going to start so much with the guy taking the snaps, the guy at the trigger point, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, such a tough season, but I mean, there's so much still there. I mean, you were at, I mean, I don't know how much he was at OTAs and mini. I know he wasn't at everything, but first off, from injury recovery standpoint, does everything sound like it's going in the right direction? And let's kind of look ahead to what he could do to the offense this year.
Yeah, injury recovery for him has been smooth sailing. He's good to go. I was very curious to see what his status would have been at the end of last year if they were still in contention. I feel like he would have pushed it and got out there. I don't think he would have been 100% by any means, but he was back on the active roster and practicing by the end of the year. So I feel like within probably a couple months after maybe the Super Bowl, I'd say like March, April, he probably got back to full strength. And by the time OTA's mandatory minicamp, he wasn't there. That was its own story. But he was there for all the voluntary practices throughout the offseason, or the majority of them. And when he was there, he was a full go. And he looked pretty healthy, throwing the ball, moving around, just as I think spry, and in terms of his arm strength, looked as good as he did last offseason with the Jets when he looked very sharp throughout the practice periods. So, yeah, health-wise, it's looking good for him. Obviously, the major factor is whether that will be maintained throughout the season. And, I'm sure we'll get into that, but they made a lot of improvements to increase his odds of being able to last throughout an entire 17-game season and hopefully more than that. And, I think the whole team is hoping that he can provide the impact that they were looking to get after 2022, when you already knew in that 2022 season, you had Garrett Wilson, you had Breece Hall, even Tyler Conklin to throw in there. You have these great weapons, especially those, first 2 guys I mentioned, just top of the line young stars. You just needed a quarterback who could put it all together. And that was the hope going to last year. You didn't get it. So you got another full season of both of those guys not hitting the ceilings that we all know they're capable of, because the box is stacked. So Breece Hall doesn't have the ability to get as much space as he needs to run as freely as he can. And Garrett Wilson is not getting accurate passes consistently. He's not getting targeted when he's open as frequently as he should be. And with Rodgers in there, I think you're hoping that he can mitigate some of those issues and allow each of your really talented skill position weapons to hit the ceilings that through the eye test, they've shown that they have. But production wise, they've done good things. are very good things, but they're capable of a lot more, and they just need a even competent quarterback to be able to hit those ceilings.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Obviously there wasn't. I mean, the quarterback play was rough last year. I mean, not what was to be expected when Aaron Rodgers was in there. He was always a guy who was very methodical and never one of the Packers were never one of the teams that led the league in a total number of offensive plays. He liked to work the clock and everything like that. Do you feel like that's gonna that is gonna carry over here and kind of like he'll have to be he'll have to basically be efficient, which he has been. I mean, that's why he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But within this offense that won't that will rely on a great defense and also he won't have as many pass attempts, but he'll have to be very efficient in those pass attempts.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Jets definitely want to be, I don't want to say a run first team, because I don't think each year there are a handful of teams, even in today's modern league, that are actually running more than they're passing. Like, I think the Falcons did it last year. The Ravens have done it. So I don't think they're going to be quite to that level, because there's still so much upside in this passing game. But I think they want the success of the run game to facilitate that passing game more so than Rodgers having to, carry the whole team at this stage of his career. So they have a running back who has the potential to be the best in the league. They have a revamped offensive line with Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, John Simpson, plus the depth is strengthened because there are some injury questions with those guys. The depth is strengthened by drafting Olu Fashanu in the first round. So they have a lot of talent on the offensive line. I think they trust that they can run the ball consistently and work their play action game off of that. And just keep Aaron Rodgers out of situations where he has to, be overworked and put in too many situations where he's going through long developing dropbacks that put him at risk of getting injured like he did on the fourth play of last season. So yeah, I do expect the Jets to be near the top of the league in terms of their run pass split. Not to the extent that they're going to run more, but definitely I would say they'll be top 10 in terms of the run play percentage. I would say that's their goal in a perfect world, assuming that they're not trailing too often and you don't get into catch-up mode, which you don't expect to happen with this defense. But assuming that doesn't occur, then I think they're going to aim to be one of those top 10 rush attempt teams.
Oh, well, let's jump into the guy who's going to be one of those rush attempts. You mentioned he could be a contender for the top running back in the NFL. You got Breece Hall. He's currently in underdog ADP. He's the number 8 pick overall. I mean, he had over close to 1,600 yards last year, total yards. Touchdowns weren't there. He had 9 total, but without the threat of the passing game, how much can you characterize how tough it was for him to get those yards, especially considering the fact that in the first 3-4 games, he was still kind of working his way back from his torn ACL the previous year?
Yeah, so that what you just mentioned was a factor as well. It did take a few games until he fully took on the number 1 workload. I mean, I just pulled up his carries here. It was about 4 games. He had 10, 4, 12, and 6 carries over the first 4 games until he finally hit 22 in his 5th. And then from then on, he was the clear-cut top guy. They took the training wheels off. But even in some of those games, because one of the biggest limitations was the fact that because they were trailing so frequently, because the offense was terrible, he couldn't get high volumes of rush attempts. Like, even when I hear some of his carry numbers middle of the season, you had a stretch here from weeks 10 through 15 where he was at 13, 10, 7, 13, 10, and 6. Now, granted, he was getting a lot of extra receptions off of that because they did like to use him in the passing game.
Mm-hmm.
And because they couldn't push the ball down the field, he ate up a lot of those checkdowns and dump offs. So it did work both ways. It did help him in the passing game. But in terms of as a runner, he definitely didn't get a chance to really rack up the volume until the last game when he had 37 in the snow, which was insane. So he made up for lost time with that one. But for the most part, yeah, he couldn't get that rhythm. And then from an efficiency standpoint, it was very boom or bust for him. He ended up with 4.5 yards per carry, but that was largely on the strength of a few big plays that he had throughout the season, but play to play, there were a lot of stuffs in there because the blocking was bad, and then it was exacerbated by the fact that, you don't respect Zach Wilson and Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian. So teams are loading the box, daring the Jets to throw the ball against man coverage, and the Jets never punish them for it. So why not continue to put an extra defender in the box? So you're going against a loaded box. Your offensive line is already not good as it is. You're not getting a chance to build a rhythm and rack up carries because you have to get into, pass heavy mode really early. So he had everything working against him last year in terms of the run game. But he did still manage, despite all of that, to average an efficient yards per carry, to get to just shy of 1,000 yards, and do it in spite of all of those things. So you're hoping that with more leads and opportunities to get your carries up, more efficiency with a lighter box because of the quarterback, and more yards before contact because of a better offensive line, all of those improvements on top of a guy who already has averaged 4.8 yards per carry in his career, despite all of those obstacles. And the ceiling for his rushing potential is extremely high. The only question I have with him is what's going to happen to his receiving, because, like I said, he did benefit from some of those things because they were passing so much, because they didn't have great downfield passing. He did eat up a lot of receptions through that. Now, he is a great receiver, and I think it's warranted that he gets that many. And Rodgers does like to use his running backs in the passing game, because Aaron Jones was second on that Packers team in targets for each of Rodgers' last 4 seasons there. So he'll still be heavily involved. There could be a little bit of a decline from where he was, though, but the rushing ceiling is extremely high for sure.
Question about because he missed a little time in the mandatory minicamp, lower leg. They didn't say exactly, but it was like it seemed like it was leg related. Him coming off the torn ACL, that kind of brought up some, made the antenna go up. But any idea what that's related to, or was it really precautionary and they're expecting full go by training camp?
Yeah, it is very precautionary. That he said himself, he was quoted as saying that he would be able to practice if it were a game week, but it was extremely precautionary. I think in general we've seen a lot of that from the Jets this offseason in terms of just like very strong precautionary approach with injuries. And why not after the season that they just had? Like Tyron Smith wasn't out there practicing. There are various AVTs, Elijah Vera Tucker's not back practicing yet. So, yeah, I think they're playing it really safe and justifiably so after what they went through last year, and with the team that does have a lot of players with a track record of serious injuries who you want to be cautious with. So, yeah, Breece Hall, that was a minor injury. It seemed like they're being on the extremely precautionary side with.
Okay. Any backup to keep an eye on? Or is it, they've drafted a couple. Yeah. They had Abanaconda. Anybody to keep an eye on behind them?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how that shakes out, because they did draft Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis on the third day this year, which both of those guys are kind of inside the tackles, downhill sort of runners, which it seems like the Jets are transitioning towards that type of running style and running scheme between their offensive line additions and those guys. So I think Breece Hall is ultimately going to be one of the most dominant RB1s in the league in terms of how much he's going to dominate the share of touches out of the backfield. But with that being said, I do think that they really like these guys, and it's very early, but they did generate a lot of hype in minicamp. They did impress while they were there, especially out of the backfield. But I think they are going to try to get these guys involved occasionally, but until we see anything significant in the preseason or even when the season starts, I would expect Breece Hall to dominate this, get the lion's share to an extent that rivals just about anyone in the league.
I love it. Yeah, 299 total touches for him last year. And so, fingers crossed. We get more. We get about 300. Hit over the 300 threshold, and I think that'll really pay off. And he really could give Christian McCaffrey a run for the RB1 right now. He's going off. He and Bijan Robinson are the RB2 and 3. They're taking turns there. So, mi amigo, I think I honestly kind of wonder how Garrett Wilson ended up with 168 targets last year. and 95 catches. But I mean, and it still comes off as a rough year, but he's still in, going in the first round of fantasy drafts, the early underdog drafts. How much of a step forward could we be talking about with Aaron Rodgers giving him that leg up?
Yeah, I think what you're looking for with Wilson is more efficiency with the targets that he gets. Because, like you said, 168 already last year, which was
I'll take
near
that.
the top of the league. He'll take that every day from your receiver.
Yes.
But you would also like him to turn 168 into more than 3 touchdowns and 1,042 yards. So I think that's what you're going to get this year. I don't see his targets going up more than that. It might even go down a little bit just because the Jets passed so much last year. I mean, they finished the year 11th in passing attempts. I think they want to slide down a little bit from there. And because he had so little competition, the wide receiver room was very poor beyond him last year. And now you're hoping to improve that with hopefully a healthy Mike Williams, Malachi Corley, who they drafted in the 3rd round. So there's more talent in the room to compete with him. And I think the overall passing volume will go down. So I think you could see a slight decline in targets. But at the same time, Rodgers' recent track record, what did we see in Green Bay? He had one superstar receiver who's an amazing 3-level route runner with great hands, and he dominated the targets to the extent, to where I said earlier, a running back was second on the team in targets because he was just eating up so much. Devontae Adams was. And I think Garrett Wilson can very much step into that role. So I expect targets to be very high, maybe a little bit lower, but you're just hoping to get more out of them. And I think the accuracy you saw from the quarterbacks last year and the field vision, between those two things, there were a lot of plays where Garrett Wilson did his part to make a big play, and it just wasn't capitalized upon. And I think Aaron Rodgers is going to capitalize on a lot more of those opportunities this year. So 3 touchdowns. There are just so many examples last year, whether it's going deep, whether it's in the red zone, where he's there, the separation is created, he did his part, but the ball is just not getting – he's either not being targeted or he doesn't get targeted and the ball's not in the right spot. So I think you're looking for Rodgers to capitalize on more of those and boost that yards per target and the touchdowns much further from where it was last year on that same high volume of targets to hopefully give you one of the top receivers in the league this year.
Oh yeah. Well, and you mentioned Mike Williams, and Malachi Corley. We could give a little bit of the spotlight to them real quick. Williams, how is he looking coming off of his own torn ACL, which I believe it happened in September of last year? And kind of Corley being integrated into the offense.
Yeah, Williams it seems like he's on track with his recovery from that, which last year Breece Hall returned. He was ready for the start of the regular season. He did not practice, did not play in the preseason, but he suited up for week 1, and he suffered his, and I believe week 7 of the previous season. So Mike Williams, I think, was 4 weeks earlier than that, but you're also talking about a 30-year-old receiver versus Breece Hall was 21 when he tore his ACL. So I think caution is warranted with Mike Williams because he already does have a track record of being injury prone, and it's a little overblown because his games played is usually pretty good. He hasn't had a lot of serious injuries that knocked him out for whole seasons before this one, but he's very frequently in and out of games, which from a fantasy perspective definitely scares you. So, and he, will miss a game here, he'll be back, then he'll miss a couple. And a lot of it is back and neck injuries, which is definitely a scary thing, especially for someone who plays a very vertical game, or, above the rim. So there's a lot of question with his age, his recovery. It seems likely he'll be back for the first game, but it's definitely something to be monitored as the season, as the offseason goes along. Seeing how he does in terms of rehabbing, getting back on the field. I don't expect we'll ever see him practicing or playing a preseason game. Definitely not preseason, but I don't think he'll probably not get into any training camp practices, but he should be on track to maybe get in towards the end of it and be there for the first game. But we'll see what his role is because he is already proven in a number 2 role next to a really good number 1 receiver. He showed next to Keenan Allen that he could put up really good numbers in that position. I mean, you look at what he's done on a per game basis, and he's been a top 15 to 20 receiver in the league. It's just a matter of staying healthy and putting full seasons together. And then we'll see what role he slides into in this offense. I think he has a clear path to being the Jets' number 2 target. I think that's wide open for him if he is healthy and can take advantage of that chance. But we'll see. I think ideally the Jets would like him to be closer to maybe what he was earlier in his career, where he was kind of like lower volume, but really high yards per reception and a lot of touchdowns. I think that's what they're hoping to go for, because they have a lot of guys to spread the ball around to, whether it's Breece Hall, Tyler Conklin. I think they want to get Malachi Corley involved. And like we said, Garrett Wilson is expected to get a high target share here. So I think with Mike Williams, they're hoping he stays healthy. He can give you chunk gains vertically down the field, be a threat in the red zone. So I think you're looking for him to be a high upside wide receiver too in this offense.
Love it. And Corley, so many rookies kind of take like part of the season to get up to speed in the back half. Though Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the greatest track record with rookie wide receivers. Yeah. With trusting rookie wide receivers. Kind of how do you see that shaking out?
Yeah, with Corley, I think we still got to see how training camp and the preseason go before we get a clearer view of what his role is going to be off the bat. Because right now, at least through minicamp and OTAs, Xavier Gibson, the undrafted slot receiver from last year, who was their returner, and got some run at the end of the year in the slot, he's been above Corley so far, and it seems like he's progressed a little bit, and they like what he's doing. But that's not totally surprising, because this regime does have a history of making rookies earn it before they throw them into the big role. I mean, Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson weren't starters on the initial training camp depth chart. So the Jets always do that. I don't think that rules Corley out of anything just yet. Being their starting slot receiver in week 1, maybe even the number 2 receiver, pending how Mike Williams looks. So I don't think any of that is ruled out. But we do have to see him earn it first throughout training camp and the preseason. But at the minimum, I think he's going to get a good amount of design touches, like jet sweeps, end arounds, screens, things like that. I think he's going to be their primary guy on those types of plays. And then even if he does start out that way, I think by mid-season, we could see him grow into a more expanded role, potentially the top slot option. But it just the biggest question is, how quickly is he going to get to that? Is he going to start out in week 1 as a starting slot, and he's going to be your second or third target on the team? Or is he going to start out as the gadget guy and maybe work towards a more expanded role? So still in wait and see mode on Malachi Corley. I think his stock going into the year will change a lot between now and the end of August.
How about Tyler Conklin? I mean, he's kind of getting some buzz in the fantasy community. He's got, 87 targets each of the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, Conklin is fascinating to project, because I think like Jets fans who watch him, like myself, Joe Blewett at Jets X Factor, who like watch the film really closely, we love Conklin's game. Like, his route running is really impressive. He is great in the short to intermediate range. If he's matched up on a linebacker or safety, he has great technique in his routes to separate. His hands are awesome. His drop rate, his contested catch rate, all that was off the charts last year. So he's a really nice all-around game, even if he's not like a special athlete or physical specimen. But last year, like the numbers he got last year were interesting. If you look at his counting stats over the last 2 years since the Jets got him, 58 receptions, 22, 61 receptions in 23. The receptions have been there. The yards, 552 up to 621 last year. So like, he's top 10 to 15 in a lot of these counting stats among tight ends over the last 2 years. It's just a lack of touchdowns. He only had 3 in 2022, and he did not score a touchdown this year. So the efficiency in terms of yards hasn't been awesome, and he hasn't scored touchdowns. What I think we're going to see this year is potentially the targets and receptions go down because of like all the mouths to feed that we already mentioned. Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, Corley. I think you still want to feed Breece Hall. I think targets for Conklin might go down because he did catch a lot of, like, similar to Breece Hall, I think he caught a lot of dump offs in the flat because of poor receiver play and just poor quarterback vision. I think he was eating up a lot of those, and that's why he has pretty high reception totals, but not equally impressive yards and touchdowns, was because he's getting a lot of those types of receptions. So I think a lot of those will be removed from his game, but I do think we're going to see a spike in touchdowns this year because Rodgers does throw touchdowns. Like, Rodgers has never been huge on high volume to tight ends, partially because he hasn't really had great tight ends, but we've seen a lot of years where a random tight end, and I'm not saying Tyler Conklin is random, but like you'll see Robert Tonyan or Richard Rodgers, like some of these guys just come out of nowhere and have these huge touchdown seasons. And even in between that, he'll get like 5 to 6 touchdowns a year to the tight end. So I think Conklin and his route running and his hands are going to be maximized in the red zone this year. I think he's going to get 5-6 touchdowns. And I think he's going to be more efficient in terms of his targets too. Like we'll see more throws up the seam. He was really good at those seam shots last year, but just didn't get a lot of them. So I think his volume is going to go down. And in terms of total receptions, I think that will potentially go down. But I think we're going to see Conklin do more with the opportunities that he gets, specifically in the red zone. So I think he has a chance for at least a solid year with touchdowns. And I wouldn't rule out him having one of those random Aaron Rodgers years where he picks his favorite tight end and is a fixture in that area.
I'm still remembering that. I think it was 2020 that Robert Tonyan year just came out of nowhere. I think he got double-digit touchdowns that year on only 50 receptions. So yeah, if Aaron Rodgers likes you, he's gonna pepper you. But
for sure,
you've touched on the offensive line. I mean, how much of an upgrade are we talking about when you go to Tyron Smith over what was a turnstile of number of left tackles?
On paper, it's massive. I mean, the offensive line last year pretty much, once Elijah Vera-Tucker got hurt, which is another huge key, they really need 17 games out of him because he alone, like his impact has been crazy. Like you want to talk about Breece Hall, you can go another step further. Breece Hall's impact has relied on AVT because he's averaged over 6 yards a carry on plays where AVT has been on the field in his career so far.
Wow.
And like, that's just with him being there, even with the rest of the offensive line being a turnstile. So you project that, and now Tyron Smith is in there, who still is a top 3 tackle when healthy last year. Morgan Moses is still viewed as a top 10 tackle. They got John Simpson at left guard, who's at least an average starter, which as your weakest link is a nice spot to be. And then at center, they got Joe Tippmann, their second-round pick from last year, first center drafted, who was pretty much an average starter already, despite really poor circumstances around him as a rookie. He's expected for a leap, and you're hoping to see him potentially get into the top 10 range for center. So really left to right, it's all there. They don't really have a clear weakness. You have superstar upside with AVT and Tyron Smith and potentially Tippmann as well. So it's, if healthy, should be one of the best offensive lines in the league. It just has a lot of injury questions. Tyron Smith is pretty much guaranteed to miss at least 3 games. He's done that 8 years in a row. Morgan Moses is up there in age and had some pectoral and shoulder issues last year. AVT has had early season-ending injuries in back-to-back years. So it's a lot of injury questions. That is the concern. But if these 5 guys are out there healthy, it is very legitimately one of the best offensive lines in the league in terms of pure talent, 1 to 5.
Love it. One team that was not falling off last year was the defense, and against the run, against the pass, they just they seem to be good. It's a young group. I mean, not a lot of turnover from this group, right?
Yeah, I mean, they do have a couple. For the most part, it's very much intact. It's just the big one is going to be Bryce Huff going over to the Eagles. He was the heart of their edge rush last year in a situational pass rushing role. Mainly playing on passing downs, was not much of a factor against the run. But when he was out there against the pass, I mean, he was one of the most efficient pressure producers, sack producers in the league per play. He was fantastic when he was out there. So that was a big loss. But they do bring in Hassan Reddick to replace him, who has his own contract drama going on right now. I think that'll be resolved by the time training camp happens. I don't see him holding out or anything. So we'll see with that, but I expect him to be on the field. However it gets resolved, that's usually these things are just, news filling up in the middle of the summer when there's nothing else to talk about. But they get Hassan Reddick to replace Bryce Huff. Different type of player. I don't think he's more capable of playing every down than Huff is. He's been a 70% plus snap count player. at his previous stops. I think that'll go down, and he'll be, because the Jets like to rotate their D linemen, and he'll be fresher. He'll be more efficient in terms of his pass rushing. But he's more of a sack artist than Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff was more of consistent pressure. Hassan Reddick is more of a sack guy. So maybe he'll be less consistent in terms of pressure, but I think you'll see more of the splash plays. So we'll see the impact of that. But other than that, I mean, a lot of what makes this defense great is still there. Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, DJ Reed, Michael Carter II, CJ Mosley, Quincy Williams, all these guys, Jermaine Johnson, still intact. So, yeah, I mean, PFF recently did their unit grade rankings, and they had the Jets number 1 in defensive line, linebacker, and secondary. And Mike Clay at ESPN, their analytics guy, had them most of their defensive units up in that same area. So yeah, like most rankings that you look at that are just ranking cumulative talent around the league have the Jets still near the top defensively. So yeah, the same unit that was third best in DVOA last year, they're poised to rank in a similar spot. I mean, they have a couple questions. The interior defensive line after Quinnen Williams isn't great. They did lose Quentin Jefferson, who was a solid player. John Franklin Myers, edge defender, also lost him, but they're hoping to mitigate that with Will McDonald, their first-round pick last year, who's expected to take on a much bigger role on the edge this year. Safety is pretty average, mediocre, but all the superstar talent is still there that anchors this defense. In terms of like the number of stars they have, there's probably no other team, maybe a handful of teams that could rival that. Like your San Francisco, maybe Philadelphia, right, Baltimore, Cleveland's up there. A few teams in the league that could rival that, but yeah, it's still on track to be one of the best defenses in the league.
Yeah, so we're not expecting a lot of shootouts in this season.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. I mean, the Jets really, the defense there have been games where they haven't been dominant in recent years, but they've done a really nice job of not having those 1 or 2 games where it's like, we just don't have it and the other team's going to drop 40 on us this week. Because, some defenses are solid, but they'll be susceptible to that every now and then. With the Jets, they've been very consistent from week to week at just sub 20 games, even if it's not their day, mid 20s in terms of scoring. So yeah, their consistency has been impressive. I don't see a lot of shootouts. The only thing is that last 2 years, opposing offenses, not a lot of reason to be aggressive against this Jets team when you know that offense on the other side is only going to force you to score like 17 points to win the game. So that is my only question is, are we going to see a different approach from opposing offenses because they now respect what the Jets offense is going to do? Is that going to potentially unlock some weaknesses that may have been hidden the past couple of years? But on the counter to that, the Jets' pass defense is their strength, their pass rush, their ability to tee off when they know the other team's going to pass. So if the other team's passing more, which was not happening last year, they were 30th in opposing pass attempts, that could only benefit them because it's more chances for this pass rush to tee off and do what they do best. So it goes both ways, but overall, I think it's still expected to be a very solid defense.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. I always get smarter when I'm with you. Thank you, mi amigo.
Thank you.
Before we close up, you got any hot Mexican food takes?
Well, I pulled this up before we started because I wanted to get it right. But there's a spot here. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. There's a spot just outside of here, Cornelius, North Carolina, called Osito's Tacos. And they have a taco called the Osito. It's their signature taco. And it has pickle brine southern fried chicken, collard slaw, grilled corn, pico, cheese, and Osito sauce, which is, I don't know what it is, but they got this mystery sauce that is fantastic. And this is elite. Every single time I go there, I get it. I go there too much. They've taken way too much of my money. Actually, it's not too much. It's earned. It's totally earned. So shout out to them.
Ositos, do you know what it means?
It's Bear, right?
Little Bear, the Little Bear.
Little Bear. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Osito. Oh my goodness. And underrated. I've been to North Carolina. I had Mexican food there. Underrated, very good. There's a nice size Mexican community in North Carolina. So you're gonna get some authentic stuff. So, oh my goodness, fried chicken, Southern fried chicken. Oh,
yeah, it's so good.
Oh my goodness. Oh, because I've asked, like, people like in places, and in North Carolina is very famous for its barbecue, like, the having the food, mixed into tacos. I love it when when something of the region is worked into tacos, and it's oh my goodness. Okay, I'm gonna have to. You're gonna. If, one of these days, I'm gonna get to Charlotte, and that's gonna be on the list of where to go. So,
yeah, for sure.
Mi amigo, let's close up shop. Please pump anything you got coming up in these weeks leading up to training camp.
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Twitter at Michael_Nania. Check out my articles at jetsxfactor.com. I'm doing my best to fill out these summer months here, just finding in-depth topics to talk about while, nothing new is happening to really spur the discussion, but I'm trying to dig deep and, what didn't we have time to cover during the season, during the draft, all these, when things were rapid fire, what didn't we have time to cover then that I can now go really in depth now because we have the time to do it. Those are the topics I like to focus on. So, yeah, check out jetsxfactor.com and it's all there.
Awesome. Yes. Check them out and their YouTube page. Page, your guys' breakdowns. Elite, mi amigo. Well, this was an elite episode. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking flight with us. Familia, make sure you're going to Familia FFb on YouTube. You get the great content like you have here in the NFL Insider series. We're about 2/3 of the way through, so we're still taking you all the way to training camp, keeping your timeline filled. So make sure to get in there. Also, underdog fantasy. Use that promo code Familia. Okay, you're gonna get matched up to the dollar for dollar. So get in there. I just started another best ball draft today. So you might be drafting against me. So let's go. Best Ball Mania 5. Let's go win some money. Mi amigo, otra vez, Miguel, muchas gracias for joining us. And muchas gracias, familia. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.